The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hello and welcome to Open 2.0. I'm your host, Alyssa Cologne, and today we have a great show for you. I hope you're all staying healthy and safe at home. There are over 40,000 youth in the justice system, and they're one of our most vulnerable populations. Today, we will talk with the Coalition for Juvenile Justice to learn more. Here with us is Naomi Evans, Executive Director of the Coalition for Juvenile Justice. Welcome to the show, Naomi Evans. It's great to have you here on Open 2.0. So my first question is, can you tell us about the Coalition of Juvenile Justice and their mission?
Sure. So the Coalition for Juvenile Justice, also known as CJJ, we've been around for about 36 years. We were founded by a mother in Maine who, from her kitchen table, started this national movement because she wanted to make sure that young people were treated equitably across the country. Her main goal was to make sure that federal legislation was passed around juvenile justice to create sort of a system that all the states had to comply with, to make sure that young people had an equal playing field as much as possible, and that we weren't detaining kids for low-level behaviors, that we were keeping them at home, keeping them in their communities. And we continue to try to do that. We continue to try to make sure that young people are connected with services to address underlying needs and not detained, recognizing that there are a lot of things going on in a young person's life, and also trying to co-lead that movement with young people. So part of our work and a member of our executive board is a young person currently incarcerated in Washington State. So we work closely with him to lead our Emerging Leaders Committee. We also work on federal policy on Capitol Hill and with the administration, with the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. And our goal is just to make sure that young people are at home in their communities where they belong, thriving and having successful futures. So we are not a direct service provider, but we do work with states and communities across the country to improve policies. A lot of our work focuses on status offense behaviors, so low-level behaviors like running away from home, skipping school, things that nobody cares about after you turn 18, but before 18 are illegal, and in some jurisdictions can result in detention. So for example, I live in Virginia. I was just on the phone with some of their juvenile justice agency folks last week. The days are sort of blurring together right now. But I was on the phone with them and we were talking about the fact that school here is out through the end of the year. But because of laws that are in place in Virginia, there are kids who are in detention facilities for truancy, right? So it's physically impossible for them to go to school right now, but they're in a detention facility for not going to school. So helping states work through those inconsistencies. We also do a lot of work around juvenile justice and youth homelessness. So we're doing training and technical assistance in 2 communities right now to try to help identify what's the overlap between juvenile justice and youth homelessness, right? We see that a lot of young people are criminalized for experiencing homelessness, and then we also see that folks don't always have the supports they need when they come out of a facility to have safe, stable, and secure housing. So trying to address both ends of that system with communities across the country. And we just got off a Twitter chat that we were doing to try to help folks send kids home right now because of the COVID-19 crisis, right? It's safer for kids to be at home than it is in close, overcrowded facilities where it's nearly impossible to do social distancing. So we're encouraging folks to send kids home, but send kids home with the supports they need to be successful and healthy and safe.
So I said there were over 40,000 like in the system roughly. Can you talk about the youth that are in the system and how COVID is affecting them right now?
Every night, there's about 48,000 folks, young people who are in detention facilities, and then it also includes folks who are in adult jails and lockups facing adult charges. Um, in terms of number of cases in the justice system, it's about 850,000 cases that are brought against young people each year. That number has gone down dramatically over the past 11 years. It's about half of what it used to be, but clearly there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. And of those cases, about 226,000 over the course of the year will result in detention for some period of time. For some folks, that's a really short period of time. For some folks, it's a longer period of time. But obviously, we want to make sure that our kids, whenever possible, are at home and getting services in their community instead of in a detention facility. We know that jails and detention facilities are dangerous. There's increased risk for physical and sexual assaults, and now also potential exposure to COVID-19. We also know that it's really expensive to detain a young person. It costs exponentially more to send a kid to detention than it does to send them to college. So it doesn't make sense from a lot of perspectives. And I think, we also just obviously continue to have systemic racism as a part of this issue, right? We see far more Black and brown kids being detained than white kids. And so there's just so many problems and inequities with putting kids in detention centers instead of keeping them at home. I don't know of anyone who has tested positive yet, but I do know that I don't know of any youth who have tested positive yet. I do know that there are staff in facilities that have tested positive, and that young people in those facilities have been tested as well themselves. Um, but obviously, if you're in tight quarters with someone, that poses a danger. And in other countries and in other facilities elsewhere, we've seen that once a case comes in, it sort of spreads like wildfire.
How has the mission and goals of the coalition deepened since the rise of the pandemic?
Yeah, so CJJ is a membership organization, and our primary membership are state advisory groups, which are governor appointed bodies in each state and territory that administer federal juvenile justice funds at the state level. And they're staffed by the state juvenile justice agency, which is in the position right now of having to sort of scramble and figure out, what do we do? How do we respond to this unprecedented thing that, really there was no way to plan for this. There was no way to see this a year ago and think this was going to happen. So we've been trying to step up into a leadership role and help them identify how they can, balance the needs of public health and serving our young people and protecting our young people. And I think also as part of that, there's really an opportunity now. We as a field have for a really long time thought that, it's best for young people to be at home in their communities. It's best to not have young people under super tight scrutiny for probation, right? When anybody's under a microscope, like that scrutiny is intense, and the little tiny mistakes that folks make are able to be seen when you're being watched constantly. All of those things we've understood just didn't make sense, and now there's an opportunity to show the rest of the world that we don't need those things, right? There hasn't been an uptick in crime as we've started to release folks from prisons and jails and detention facilities. There hasn't been, in fact, there's actually been a reduction in arrests because SROs haven't been engaged in schools with school closures, and less of a constant police presence in young people's lives. There's been a reduction in referrals to juvenile court already. So I think this is going to give us an evidence point to use for future additional continued reform. So I think there is some silver lining there. And I think there's also, because we believe in a co-led movement with young people and sharing that space with them, I think this forces the older folks among us, myself included, to learn new technologies, to learn new ways of communicating, to adapt and adjust to a world that we live in, right? And to accept the things that young people have had in their lives for their whole lives that are like newer to some of us.
I also wanted to ask, how can communities and youth get involved with the coalition?
So each state, as I mentioned, has a juvenile justice state advisory group, and it is required by law to be made up of at least 25% folks who haven't yet reached the age of 24. So it's a really great opportunity for young people to get engaged and to get engaged in a decision making process. So those folks set the 3-year plan for their juvenile justice agency. They help administer those federal dollars that come in, and we have a member of our executive board who's on the New York State Advisory Group. Her name is Michelle Diaz. She used to be our emerging leaders chair, and now she's our national vice chair. She's a phenomenal young woman. But definitely, if folks are interested in getting linked up with their state advisory group, that would be great. The Vera Institute of Justice is also based in New York and does phenomenal work around juvenile justice reform and justice reform generally. And then I think also just, you know, youth-led movements, right? I don't, as a member of the establishment, it feels weird to say that you don't necessarily need an organization to like link to, right? Young people build movements all the time. And I think that's always definitely an opportunity as well for young people to take the lead and build things of their own. CJJ has an Emerging Leaders Committee. It has 10 members from across the country. We do an application process every year, and they help shape our policy initiatives. They advise us. The chair, like I mentioned, serves on our executive committee. And that committee usually is about half folks who are incarcerated and half folks who either have previous system involvement or are just interested in the juvenile justice system and want to help make a difference. So that's definitely a way to get involved. We also have a youth summit every summer, which has typically a live and a virtual component as well. So folks who want to learn more, it's a great opportunity. It's led by our Emerging Leaders Committee, so they shape the curriculum for that event. They present at that event. So it's really by and for young people. And then also, as I mentioned, the state advisory groups are another great way to get involved. I think those are the main ways.
Also, are there any laws or initiatives in the works to help youth within the justice system, or any laws being talked about right now?
The main federal law on juvenile justice is the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act. And that was just reauthorized in 2018 at the end of the year. And it's being phased in now. So that's going to have a lot of new provisions that apply to young people. It's going to make sure that young people who are tried as adults can no longer be held in an adult facility while they're awaiting trial. So they'll need to be in a facility that's made for youth and is better suited to meeting the needs of young people. It also makes sure that young women who are giving birth can't be placed in shackles while giving birth, which never should have happened to begin with. It's absurd that we had to make a law to prohibit that, but it's got a lot of great protections around reducing solitary confinement, making sure that educational credits that young people receive while they're in a facility transfer back to their home school. And it strengthens reentry provisions. So making sure that there's a plan for how we're going to make sure that a young person has housing, is linked up with education, is linked up with employment if they need it. All of those things to help them successfully go back home when they're leaving a facility.
Awesome.
And so each state is going to have to update its laws to come into compliance with that. There's also in the CARE Act, the stimulus package that's being considered by Congress right now, and probably should have passed by this point in the day. But that law has some juvenile justice provisions in it, specifically allowing communities to do webcasts and remote hearings for their juvenile justice proceedings while COVID-19 is going on.
Are there any ways that we can help with the Youth Coalition now during this pandemic?
Youth First, which is another nonprofit organization, is a phenomenal ally in that work. And they're currently working with each state to get a letter sent in to the governor calling for young people to be released right now. And they're also doing some phenomenal work to close youth prisons across the country entirely. So I would definitely encourage you, if you're interested in getting engaged in that part of the work, to reach out to Youth First. I think this is a challenging time for all of us, for everyone. It's definitely a very challenging time for folks who are stuck in facilities and away from home and away from families. But I think that there's also some opportunity here for us to come out the other side of this and really concretely know and have evidence and have proof that jails and detention centers don't work. And we need our kids at home where they're safe. And that's always the case. That's always the truth. And I really believe that once this is over, we'll have even stronger case for that movement to bring our kids home. And I think, once again, like, we're going to come out of this with a stronger sense of, technology, how to use technology, and hopefully a world that works better for both young people and older adults.
Thank you so much, Naomi, for telling us more about the Coalition for Juvenile Justice, and for you guys at home tuning in. I hope everybody stays safe and healthy, and I'll catch you next time on the next Open 2.0. Thank you again so much, Naomi.